Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you find yourselves in the world, Tottenham fans, football fans. Where to start today? We could talk about England all day long, couldn't we? We could talk about just how bad Gareth Southgate makes a very good group of footballers look. But we won't. I'll leave that to other people. Today, I want to talk about James Maddison. As you'll see, I've entitled this video, The James Maddison Conundrum. Now, why? Could it just be possible that James Maddison had a bad year because he's not very good? Did he have a bad year? Were we expecting more? Was it the injuries? So I'm going to break it down and have a look at James Maddison and see what we thought we were getting versus what we got and why. And for me, James Maddison, this was the one signing last summer, aside from Van der Ven, who I'd seen play before and really liked him. James Maddison was the one signing for me where I said, yes, that is a step in the right direction. Yes, this is what Tottenham Hotspur have been missing since the days of Christian Eriksen. Since peak Christian Eriksen, Tottenham Hotspur have been missing any sort of guile, flair, creation, an assist merchant, as the youth of today would call it. We've been missing that. And to compensate for that, as you all know, I'm not teaching anyone to suck eggs here, as you all know, Harry Kane for about 3 or 4 years had to drop down into midfield and start playing those through balls to Son. And we got great success. We had the best years, the best combination years together between Son and Kane were when Kane was dropping deep and playing him through and vice versa. So we signed James Maddison and we all, I'll be honest, I don't really remember seeing anybody not happy, not impressed with that signing. I, for one, thought it was one of the best signings we've made in the last decade. A top England international with bundles of Premier League experience, scores a lot of goals, assists a lot, one of the only number 10s in the league, if not Europe. They seem to be a dying breed. And we were all very, very excited. He did the video as well where he said that Postecoglou had called him up and said, look, we're going to be really different this year. We're going to play different football. And I was really excited by that. And I really wanted to see, what does James Maddison do in a free-flowing formation where he's given the space of the playmaker role and allowed to do his thing. Remember I said that, the space of a playmaker role. Now, when we look at James Maddison, last year, look, there's a number of reasons why a player doesn't work out or why a player is below average or doesn't have the season or the effect or the stats that we wanted them to have. Now, that can be many things. Let's look at the obvious one, ability. For me, this is completely out the window. James Maddison has a bundle of ability. We've seen it. The world has seen this for 5, 6, 7 seasons. For me, there is nothing to do with James Maddison's ability. For me, that is out of the question. I think he's a tremendous footballer. He's shown it for years. I'm going to remove that one off the table. We go to the next one, injuries. Now, yes, James Maddison, one of the things that's always thrown at James Maddison is the number of injuries he gets, which is interesting because when you actually look at the number of Premier League games he's played year in, year out for the last 5, 6 years, he doesn't actually miss loads. He misses a few, but his seasons are normally in and around the 31 to 35 game mark. So he misses somewhere between 7 and 2-3 games a season, etc., etc. And the season he's just had, he's just missed 10, which is probably the biggest one because it was a big injury. Now, yes, injuries, of course, injuries can play a massive part depending on the injury itself, depending on how well the player trained during that injury period, depending how well they recovered, and depending how quickly they were rushed back into first team action. Now, I think there is a little bit of merit here. I think we did rush James Maddison back in from injury because of the really impressive start he had. But we'll come back to that impressive start in a minute. So for me, I do think there was a factor with the injury, but not enough for us to witness the huge drop-off that we saw towards the end of the season. So we've got ability out the window, injury, which is definitely on the table. Now we go to the player himself. the player's mentality, the player's personality. James Maddison, for me, he's one of the better people in terms of having a personality in football. For example, when I watched the England players last night, they all gave the same interview. They'd all be media trained and they all used the same sound bites. James Maddison doesn't. James Maddison very much talks openly, like he's down the pub with his mates. So for me, I'm not worried about his personality, but you do have to ask questions at the back end of the season as to why couldn't he get himself back to where he was prior to the injury. But we'll come back to that a bit later. So I think there's a little bit about the injury, a little bit about the player type. For me, I would like to see a little less goading people on YouTube, on Instagram, on X, whatever these platforms are called now. I get it, it's fun, it gets the fans all rolled up, but for me, I would like to see a little bit more from him, from Royale, from Richarlison, these people that can't stay off of their social media accounts. I'd like to see them concentrate a bit more maybe on Tottenham Hotspur. That's just me. Maybe I'm old. Now we move to the other two important parts, which are the tactics and the manager. Now, for me, when I look at the tactics that Tottenham Hotspur play, I think they are all wrong for somebody like James Maddison. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean by this. James Maddison has had a really good career to date. If we look at Coventry, Norwich, Leicester, being the number 10, being the playmaker, being the guy that pulls the strings for his team in that space between the midfield and the forwards. He's always available. He has the space. And you remember I said earlier about having the space and freedom in the number 10 role. Unfortunately for me, and this is where I don't like Ange's tactics, Ange's tactics for me completely stifle a number 10. So this is not all on Ange, by the way. As I've already said, this is injury, this is player personality, player kind of ethos. But for me, the manager has to take responsibility here as well, because we're playing a formation where for the first time in 4 or 5 years, we have a playmaker. And what do? Everybody else inverts into James Maddison's area of the pitch. So James Maddison's area of the pitch, or a number 10's area of the pitch, is that space, it's that 20 yards, isn't it, between the midfield and the forwards. It's that bit, that 20 yards outside the box where he can receive the ball. He already knows what's around him, and then he can make the decision, do I go right, do I go left, do I ping it into the forward, do I hold up play and bring others into the game? He can't do that at Tottenham, because the more and more I notice throughout the season, you've got Porro on the right, Udogie on the left, who don't play as fullbacks. They invert into midfield and high into midfield. I'm not talking about they drop into central midfield as in defensive midfield. They drop high into midfield. So you've now got Porro, Udogie, Maddison's here. You've got, let's just say, for example, Werner and Kulu start the game. Werner and Kulusevski are cutting in. They're inverting. So now you've got 5 players in that number 10 area. So when James Maddison now looks up with the ball, he's got a player 5 yards away, 5 yards away, 5 yards away, 5 yards away, all around him. And he doesn't want that. Playmakers don't want players within 5 yards of them. Playmakers want an out ball. And the example I can give of this is when James Maddison played at Leicester, and I'll back this up with stats in a minute, by the way, for those people who love a stat. When James Maddison played for Leicester, it was a very simple tactic that worked. You had Jamie Vardy up front, who was a proper number 9, not like ours. He's a proper number 9 that can go in behind, he can drop deep, he runs the channels, and he makes that movement for Madison at every chance to play balls through. Equally, the 2 midfielders he had were Wilfred Ndidi and Yuri Tielemans. Now, they functioned as a proper midfield too. There was none of this, what are they? Are they a 6? Are they 8? Tielemans was your box-to-box midfielder who tried to get forward, and Ndidi was more of your number 6 who tried to break down play. And what they did was they left the space for Madison to play. They left that space for James Maddison to play football. He also had 2 wide players for Leicester who stayed wide, by the way. This is really important. So every time James Maddison got the ball, he had options galore. Do I find Jamie Vardy early doors? Do I go out wide to the right winger or the left winger? Do I hold the ball up and bring Tielemans or Ndidi into play? Or wait for the fullbacks to come and join in? At Tottenham, I don't think we have that, because we seem to have a lot of possession for a lot of possession's sake in that midfield area, and it becomes clogged up. Now, if you've got lots of possession high up, you have to do one of two or three things. You have to do what Man City do, and you move that ball quickly. Ping, 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 ping. With players moving, swapping, moving around. Breaking down that defence, playing it into Haaland, then going to collect it again, out to Silva. This time I'm going out to Grealish. This time Foden's going to drop deep, then out to De Bruyne. Spurs don't do that. We seem to have a lot of players who are 20, 30 yards from goal who just pass it amongst themselves. And because we don't really have an out-and-out forward that can hold the ball up or run in behind, we don't really have those moves. James Maddison doesn't have the option to play those balls. So for me, very much a lot of this for me is on the tactics and the manager for a player like James Maddison. I'm not saying the tactics and can't work at all, but for me, I think it stifles a playmaker rather than helps a playmaker. If I remember Christian Eriksen loved having time on the ball. Christian Eriksen loved to receive the ball in those half spaces and turn with the ball at his feet. Right? He knew what was around him. And James Maddison's not too dissimilar in player style. I'm not going to compare the two players, but in player style, he's not too dissimilar. He gets the ball. He's quite happy to drop a shoulder. He's quite happy to play the left or the right. But you've got to give him options. And unfortunately, I've said this before, I am not a fan of everyone on the pitch inverting. I'm just not. You clog up the area. So for me, I truly believe if Tottenham were to adopt a formation where James Maddison was a playmaker behind one forward or two, and you had out-and-out width from fullbacks and wingers, width, not Werner and Johnson and Solomon and Kulu that constantly go inside, I think you would see a much better James Maddison. Look, the player's got to take so much responsibility on his own shoulders. He's now had a really bad setback. He's not made the Euro squad, which would have hurt him deep. We know that. So now this is a big year for him to come out and say, right, how am I going to react? But when we look at those stats, I'm going to back up what I just said there with stats as well. I think it's really important to not just look at the player, but we can look at some stats as well. James Maddison's just had his worst goal-scoring season for 7 years. Why? He's playing in a better team. Yeah? Why has he had the worst goal-scoring season? How are we not getting the goals out of him that we saw for the last 7 years at the likes of Norwich and Leicester? How? That's got to be addressed. We've got to get him into more shooting positions. If we look at his assists have stayed steady. His assists have been the same. But his goal scoring is what's dropped. So if we look at James Maddison last year, he played 28 games. 4 goals, 9 assists, 13 goal contributions. So it's not the end of the world. He's got 1 in 2 goal contributions. It's not the end of the world. 1 in 2 is good. But I think because of the tail off at the end of the season, I think everyone thought it was worse than it was, because he started like a house on fire. When Spurs weren't really known, when the capacity of Ange's system wasn't really known to the league, we thrived. The season before that, 30 appearances, 10 goals, 9 assists, 19 goal contributions. So 19 goal contributions in 30 games. So 2 of every 3 games, he did something. So we see how he's dropped this year. The year before that was 35 games, 12 goals, 8 assists, 20 goal contributions. So if we look at this season for Spurs has been his worst season for 3 years in the Premier League. Why? He didn't just become a bad player. He didn't just forget how to assist and how to score goals. So why? For me, I think a lot of it goes on the tactics. The player has to take a portion of responsibility. The injury will chip in there as well. But what we do know is that we've got one of the only playmakers in the country. And we've got to find a way to get this man on the ball more. We've got to find a way to give him the freedom and the space to manipulate, to pull strings. Listen, that's just my theory. Let me know what you think. Please, as I said, I really appreciate we've had some really good football debates in the last 3 days on the channel, in the chat and the comments. Please, if you disagree, just say it as it is. Just tell me why. I don't have to abuse myself or other YouTubers. Guys, girls, let me know. James Maddison, top player. We've got to utilise him. We didn't last year. Why? What do we need to do? Everybody, take care. Enjoy your very sunny Wednesday. Enjoy the Euros tonight more than you did last night. And I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.